Hello.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Ugh, hanging in there.
Yeah.
Need to make a cup of tea because my throat's just been ugh.
Oh, you haven't, and nothing's been better. You're saying it's all the same since last time?
I feel a lot better, like physically. It's just the throat that's still bothering me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think I just talk too much.
You're a busy gal, so I completely understand. What else do you have going on aside from school applications and tutoring?
I mean, that's a lot right there. So,
I mean, facts,
uh,
that's true, but hopefully you have some time to yourself too.
yeah, for sure.
Good.
Yeah, I'm really into like Sudoku. So I've been doing a lot of like Sudoku as a way to relax recently.
Good. I feel that. That was like my go-to when I was younger. I hate crossword puzzles. They make me so mad because I feel like I don't know enough.
My philosophy for crossword puzzles is that it's okay to look something up if you know you don't know it. And it
That's
makes it much more enjoyable.
that's also valid.
Hmm.
But personally, I would just be looking up everything, especially the newspaper ones, but I don't know. But also, your philosophy is correct. I'll give you the credit.
Hmm. Okay, well, how has studying been this week and weekend, I guess?
So, my weekend was kind of hectic. So, since we had my nephews and family come over from Rochester, so studying was kind of spotty over the weekend, but I made more of a condensed schedule from what we originally had on the Excel sheet onto a Word document. And it was easier for me to keep track of the topics that I went through week by week. And that's also how I was able to see if I could entwine some review like from the previous week into the following week. So I learn or review the new material, quote unquote, the week that I do the questions, like week 3. I'm counting this as week 3. So I'll be going through our usual schedule and then I will interpret flashcards from the topics that I did last week through questions.
Hmm.
And since I had a migraine Monday, I did very little of studying. I was just more of, let's see if I can better organize my schedule so I can actually have it in front of me. And that helped to not have it as spread out as the Excel. It's more of everything was there in front just to look at. And that made me more, I don't want to say satisfied, but more aware of how dense every day is supposed to be. And then also incorporating how much of flashcards to do because I don't want to do more than 50 or 60 a day because that's usually how I was able to keep up with consistent flashcards last time. So anything over 100 just seems a waste. And 70 is like kind of iffy. It's doable, but I rather give myself more of a cushion. And so I set myself to 50, 60 if I'm really being generous. And I did my first round yesterday. I went over, I mean, I could even show you kind of, I like color coding a lot. So I was also color.
That's so valid. I love color coding. Oh, you muted yourself.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. I think while I was trying to share my screen, I also somehow muted myself. But I did this as topics by week. So I have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, basically what we have in our Excel, color coded, obviously. Sunday off, or Sunday can be interpreted into whatever day of the week because my migraines are so random and chronic that I usually end up my days off or when I have my migraines, or it's just very
Hmm.
light setting, like review. But then I did it week by week, also written down, kind of interpreted what I put from my questions into what I need to review. Um, week 2, and then what I have here is more of, excuse me, the part of the flashcards that I did, like from that big foundational concept Anki that I showed you from day 1. I use those flashcards, and then I add in whatever I missed from UWorld when I do questions, because I go through UWorld and also the Jack Western MCAT outline to make sure I have all the key terms, at least in the main idea, in my Anki somewhere. So I know I can draw more emphasis on those, which also helps me reduce my flashcards deck to like from like 30 to 20. So that's relief. And of course, we're going to have Psych Soc probably going to be cut into 2 days because they have more concepts to go over by topic or like by subtopic. But
Mm-hmm.
I try to combine these two to make it about 50 to 60 flashcards. And I also make sure I don't do 2 of the same subject in one run of flashcards. So I mix it up. So this is like divided between 5 or 6 days. I already did day 1 yesterday. So I went over periodic trends and skeletal system terms. And then today I'll go over how much more time I have. So whatever time I have left of the day will determine how much I can do of flashcards from the other 4. And then same thing for next week, which will be week 4, but I'll be working through these sets of flashcards. And then week 5, I'll be working through whatever I did from this week. So it's just going to keep going on and on. And then once we actually get to the real question dense portion of my studying, I can look back into this and pick something, just whatever, just that I know that I'm weak on, or more questions have gotten wrong based on terminology. So I can easily pick out from which like session or like which flashcard set, then I can review both or one.
I
And
like
I
that.
also listed by the number of flashcards, so it's easier for me to know time-wise how much it's going to take me. Because 30 flashcards usually takes me like 45 minutes, so 50 is about an hour. So this is more of a condensed way to do it. And then, oh, I left those downstairs. My reviews for like topics, so stuff that I need to really like draw out. So like the systems, nuclear decay, periodic trends, nucleo versus electrophiles. I determined that based on one sheet of paper, an 8x11, I determined week 1 to be based on those review topics. So one sheet is 1 week.
Okay.
It's a systems, because systems takes up the whole page, and same with metabolism. But I have like a separate system for metabolism and systems because there's so much more detail to them that they're just going to be like their own separate review sheets, if that makes sense. I already have posters of like metabolism stuff, so I just keep adding on to that.
Cool. Yeah, I like this setup. I think it's very helpful. Also, I assume that like because you have like 4A, 4E, whatever, or you're following along from like the AMC guide of like the topics.
Yes,
Cool.
since UWorld is very general, how we talked about it in broad, it only specifies if it's like nucleotides, carbohydrates, or lipids. It doesn't go specifically into lipids, like is it sphingolipids or plasma membrane bilayer. It's just more of that chunk. But then because the MCAT guide is so detailed, I'm able to go through and control find that subtopic. So then I make sure like subtopic per se. So then I make sure that I go through that whole chunk as a review. So it will
I
also
like
save
that.
me time for other times when I would get something around the questions, because they usually tie the questions around that subtopic anyway. So it's nice to know or familiarize myself more how that one concept I got wrong is tied to the other concepts in that section, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's good. I was gonna show you, I have this like giant binder from when I was studying for the MCAT. But basically I like printed out the like topics guide, and then I put whatever notes I had on like the next page. But what I was low-key thinking is like if you want to do something like that, like highlight the topics you've done, and then you can look back afterwards, like in a PDF, and just see like, oh,
Right.
okay, I haven't gotten to this topic yet. I still need to do 4C, that kind of thing.
That's so
Just because
smart.
you are jumping around. Yeah, that way you see like, okay, maybe you've already highlighted 4E, but you get another question, you get it wrong, you come back, you're like, okay, maybe I need to do this a little more in depth, or no, I haven't gotten any questions for 5A. I need to go do 5A stuff.
That's so smart. I will do that because I can easily do it on the PDF itself, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, you
I
should be
just
able to.
okay, because I'm still getting myself used to the fact that I can do that on PDFs. Like I can do it on my iPad, but my pencil stopped working and I don't want to get a new pencil because that'll be my third time getting a pencil with the same iPad. And I want to treat myself when I get into medical school and get myself a whole new iPad because I've had this one for like 8 years. So I want to like,
Depending on what school you go to, they might buy you a new iPad. Some medical
oh,
schools like
really?
give
I didn't
student,
know that.
yeah. Some medical schools like give out all their students iPads. It's like insane.
I didn't know that. I knew that they would give like free like textbooks along, but I didn't know they also give you iPads. That's so
I,
oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah, some of the places I'm applying, like the one place gives me like a $1,500 like technology stipend, so you can buy like a computer or an iPad or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, that's snazzy.
Interesting. Is that along with their like student life section of the like of the portion of their sites?
Um, I would think so. I mean, I'm applying to MD PhD programs, which is a little different because
Good
like,
for you.
yeah. So like I
That's
don't have to,
you.
yeah, but I know that some just like regular MD programs still do the like iPad thing. But yeah, it's a
Admire.
crazy life.
I admire MD PhD people. Props to you. You snaps to you. I could never. I would love to, but I could never.
Yeah, which is like an advantage of like I'm young and so it's a long track, so like getting it started as soon as possible is kind of nice for me.
Especially since you know that's what you want and you can
Hmm.
show like, everything that you've done to demonstrate that in your resume and application. Good for you. Congratulations. That's already a huge
Oh,
like milestone for you. Good job.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, just got all that going on in the background, but yeah, anyways, look into iPads for medical school.
I'm rooting for
Um,
you, girl. I'm rooting for you.
thank you. Yeah, I know my Apple Pencil keeps scrapping out too, and I've also been in the same boat where I bought like four, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I just don't want to buy another one, but I really like taking notes on my iPad.
Yeah. It's so tied. Do you have a Mac?
Yeah.
So it's going to be tied, especially through med school, and everything's just going to be easier to go back and forth between the devices. And I'm already sucked into Apple, so I have like all the Apple devices. So it's like it's hard to get some kind of technology that's just out of it, you know? And it's just gonna
Hmm.
then you have to figure out how everything will be connected and how you can download. And it's just like,
Yeah, for sure. Oh God. Well, anyways, we were talking about highlighting things on the guide. I feel like that'll be really helpful, like visually. It also seems like you do well with like visual, like outlines and stuff.
very when I have to, like with the systems and metabolism pathways, it's easy to picture it when I go through, especially with metabolism, knowing how everything's connected. And then terminology basics, you would have to do it with flashcards and repetition. But graphs like enzyme activity and inhibition, everything is like there. And I ended up taking down all my MCAT stuff because I want to make my bedroom as MCAT free as possible. Well, including my house, but if I have to study, I'll do it downstairs. So I think that's also part of the reason of the burnout is because whenever I'm at home, I always feel like I have to do something other, like something that's regarding MCAT, which is a mindset that I don't want to have continuously. So I took
Hmm.
everything down and I'm just going to put it in a binder and I have all my sticky notes from the bathroom and around here and I'm just taping them into a notebook so I can have it more of as a review notebook because there's just scattered ideas and like little things. So it's easier to review when it comes around to like the final week. So I don't have to go through intense review like through previous stuff. But
Hmm. I like that. Yeah, I tried to because I was living in like a dorm room at the time, so it was small as hell. Um, So I was like, this is a no MCAT zone. Because I had like my desk and then my bed. I was like, I'm not going to be able to sit down and relax if I have MCAT going on in this like area. So yeah, I always went to like the library, or I liked studying outside if you're into that. Like, yeah, outside, just pretty places with big windows. That was generally where I tried to go.
Yeah, I feel that. I'm just trying, even though I don't have access to the university, my dad is a professor, so I use his ID to sneak in. But
Nice.
all the libraries here close early, or like the cafe, so the only really actual decent choice for late is the campus libraries, which
Mm,
reminds me. But
okay. Cool. Well, we can hop into kind of thinking about stuff for today. Um, Last time we did just kind of like general passage stuff, I think. Did you
mhm.
have any passages or questions from like your review that you wanted to go over specifically?
Not really, no. I just had an overall question because I ran into a philosophy cars passage. We treat philosophy the same, like same concept as any other cars passage? Okay.
Yeah. I think that's one particularly where it's easy to like get sucked into like what's outside knowledge and kind of what's in the passage just because it's so like meta. Um, but yeah, I think those ones, the biggest difficulty I see with them is literally just like it's so hard to understand what the heck it's talking about.
I
So
agree.
I think that yeah, that's just kind of like reading many passages, repetition, and trying to just break it down and understand what it's saying.
Yeah.
With some of the philosophy ones, like it's a little overly wordy and like just being able to like sort through like what is it actually trying to say and like pulling out some of the main points and at least understanding that, then you don't need to understand like every little random sentence that they say.
And usually, like we talked about last time, the questions will guide us to being right if the main idea is what we assumed. Since
Mm-hmm.
they always are focused on the main idea with philosophy, well, in general too. But I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I got one question wrong for yesterday's philosophy passage, so that was a plus, even though I thought I butchered it, but it seemed okay.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go through a different philosophy passage today? Just talk
Sure, why
through
not?
one. So many. Oh, there's one from yesterday. That might have been the one you did.
It was about moral perception.
Moral perception. Yeah. I find something from, okay, August. That's a long enough time ago. Whoa, I don't want this. Get me out of here. Trying to figure out how to get this to. There we go. Oh, no, I don't want the correct answers. There we go. Jack Weston doesn't always like me. I was like, you didn't answer any of these questions. I was like, because I didn't start it.
Who are you talking about? What you know?
We're doing a different one. There we go. Okay, let's get us up on the screen sharing. Cool. Can you see that?
I see dark.
You see dark. Well, that's not good.
I see literally the bar going up and down, but I don't see the questions or the passage. That's really weird. Same.
What the heck? I can like see on the screen share that it's not right. Yeah, let's try this.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, that was weird.
That was bizarre. Okay. Well, now I see you and the full picture of the passage, so that's good.
Cool. Ooh. Zoom upgraded its like drawing features.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Cool.
Interesting.
Okay. Anyway, so now we'll have fun with this passage. Okay, cool. This is a Plato passage, so it's not going to be easy to understand.
Oh,
I think it's
gross.
hilarious.
Okay. That's fine. Whatever, so be it. Has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The usual paragraph by paragraph. Okay,
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
cool. So we have the opening, what makes us think? And the author introduces Plato's origin of philosophy as wonder, but the author is like, no, it has nothing really to do with what he's remarked in other works. And then he backed it up with some ideas from Theaetetus and Socrates. So I think the author is setting up an argument against Plato's idea of wonder.
So is it arguing against wonder or supporting what Plato says?
I thought he was against.
Okay, let me see. So the way I'm reading this, so Plato says that the origin of philosophy is wonder, right? That's what this sentence says. The origin of philosophy is wonder. And an answer that, in my opinion, has lost none of its plausibility. So it's still plausible, is kind of what this is saying.
Okay.
Um, and so I think kind of this section is saying, like, during a discussion, it kind of comes out of nowhere that he says that, like, oh, like, wonder is important.
Mm-hmm.
And this short passage tells us, like, the chief passion of the philosopher is to wonder. So I think it's more supporting Plato said once, basically, the origin of philosophy is wonder. And even though he never comes back to it, it's just like this one time. It seems like it's going to be set up to support this. And I think it's based on this part because he says an answer that, in my opinion, has lost none of its plausibility.
Oh,
So it hasn't lost its plausibility, if that makes sense.
I thought because of the following sentence where rather abruptly and then saying, as far as I can see, is nowhere repeated in his works. It's more of, is this really something that we can agree with? Because there's no backup.
Yeah. Well, cause I think that like he only mentions it once is kind of this point here. So yeah, there really is no backup, but I do think that we can kind of see what he thinks about it in the other paragraphs as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like he's not, at least so far, not disagreeing. It's
Okay.
just saying like one time he mentions this, and we can see like maybe what he goes on to discuss in these later paragraphs, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that like probably just this idea is what I'm thinking about. The origin of philosophy is wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that like down here, because this short passage is a quote from Plato as well. This is chiefly the passion of the philosopher to wonder.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see kind of how the author supports or doesn't support this in the later paragraphs, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Mhm. I think this one is like you have the right idea in that we don't necessarily know exactly how he feels about wonder, but I don't think that we know like he's disagreeing with Plato or quite agreeing with Plato yet.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay,
It's
let's see
just more
what
of
paragraph two gives us.
so it's just more of here's Plato's remark about philosophy as wonder is the origin of it.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and the only thing that kind of hints us to the author's opinion is it literally says like, in my opinion, it hasn't lost its plausibility.
Got
So
it.
like it might be true.
Got it. Yeah.
And we'll see probably him trying to support that in the next few paragraphs.
Okay. So now it's getting into a bigger idea of more about like the origin of wonder, like the word itself, and connecting it to the Greek god of Homer and how he is more like the reasoning of how wonder came to be as a word. And it's more of saying that it's not an action, but one that is a passive, um, it's passive, but it's more of like the surroundings, not by the men itself.
Hmm. Yep. So basically defining what they are meaning by like, oh, at least the passion of the philosophy is to wonder. What exactly does that mean? And then we see, I like this part. Wonder is a passive idea activated by something outside of the philosopher. Does that sound good?
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Interesting. So it's more of saying, so now what sets man to wonder is more about admiring wonder and not about what we usually think wonder is, like about like it's like trying to separate the point of what we usually think of wonder, like outside, like as a puzzlement, surprise, or perplexity, but it's more of like what's behind it, like what's really, how do I describe this? Like you see a mine, like a gold mine, but it's really what the gold is, not the mine itself or the cave.
Hmm.
It's the underlying factor that is what we admire about what we admire wonder. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's
But it's
rather than like being confused, it's like, whoa.
yeah.
Okay. I like then the last sentence
It
to kind of
yeah,
go along with that.
yeah. At the hidden truth
It's
behind what struck them. Exactly. Yeah.
hmm cool. So we've said that the philosophers wonder. We've
Hmm.
defined that wonder is a passive activity, and then now we're defining that um like we're wondering at kind of the hidden world in an admiration kind of way. Cool.
So now, following the idea of admiration, we're connecting it to speech.
Mhm.
So speech is like a parallel of admiration of wonder, which is the origin of philosophy. Hence, speech is also philosophical.
Mhm. Yep. And the one part that I kind of like here is like um with our speech, we're not glorifying like the amazing appearance of things, but we're looking at like the order behind them, which itself is not visible.
Yes.
So thinking about again that layer of like the truth behind what you first see.
I was just going to say
So,
that it draws the parallel with admiring. That's not the appearance, but what's underneath.
mhm, cool.
Speaking of appearances now. Okay, I have no idea what it means, but I know what I would highlight.
Okay, what would you highlight?
The last sentence.
The world reveals the truth behind its objects and forces to those that can wonder at them. To the philosophers. Mm. Yeah, I agree. This is one of those examples of like this sentence or this paragraph is like very
Fluff.
wordy. Yeah.
It always ends up towards the end of philosophy passages where it's like there's fluff at the end, but it still pertains to the idea of the passage. And it makes me frustrated because it ends up more complex than the rest of the passage.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that I can see some sentences that kind of fit with like what we've already been talking about. So we see like this idea of the non-revealed, so like something behind what we first see. Invisible harmonious order, same thing again as like I feel like it said harmonious order up here. I really
Oh,
like that phrase of like the invisible harmonious order of the world. And this is like we see this in familiar objects.
yeah.
Non-visible harmony. Harmony seems to be a big word here. Harmonious order, non-visible harmony. This is more real and beautiful than the visible. And so then we're seeing that like people who can see this like non-visible, non-revealed harmony are the philosophers. So the world reveals kind of the hidden truth to the philosophers.
Those more of the philosophers can really see what's on the outside, but man would just see clear through it.
I think it would be kind of man would just see like what's on the outside and like a philosopher would be able to see kind of like the inner workings and like
Gotcha.
you said like the man would see the cave and then the philosopher would like understand like there's gold inside.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
Okay.
It's basically repeating what it said in the previous paragraph, except
Mm-hmm.
using physis as its suffix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this whole time we've been talking about like this hidden truth, this hidden like order. Now we just have a word for it. It's physis,
Do I
which
not
according to the
highlight? I can't highlight. That's sad.
oh on my screen.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe I could highlight, but I don't think I can, sadly. That's all right. Because I was going to highlight oh like um maybe right where your cursors of this physicist her something said that it likes to hide itself mainly behind appearances or the fall or maybe that one and then maybe along with encompasses the secret systems that make the world work. Maybe that combination of highlighting
Hmm.
or maybe just the first what you already have highlighted because then it goes into explaining what it likes to hide itself means. So maybe that would just be redundant double highlighting, but
Hmm. Yeah, I just like this first sentence. So
okay.
we've come to this kind of like flow of the paragraph or flow of the passage that I really like, where like our first paragraph here we like introduce the idea of wonder,
Yes.
um, and that Plato talks about wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Then we actually define that wonder is passive and it's like something we experience from the outside. And then it talks about basically like defining what that actually means. And so, like, all these paragraphs talk about like hidden, not visible, um, this kind of like hidden truth that philosophers can see. And that's kind of what philosophy is understanding this hidden truth. So I like the flow kind of from top to bottom of this.
So it's literally going as broad as possible to the specifics. So like the whole idea of wonder to the specific of this is how philosophy sees wonder or approaches
Mm-hmm.
wonder, the idea of wonder.
Yeah. I think this first paragraph here is like introduction. What does wonder like when do we see wonder introduced?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what actually does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what does this mean in the context of philosophy?
So you're right. He is arguing for, he supports everything.
Yeah. So I think because the paragraph ends up being less of an argument about like, oh, I support wonder versus I don't support wonder. It kind of just jumps right into this is wonder.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So if it was asking about kind of the author's opinion, I think we really have this sentence to reference, and then we could kind of like make assumptions from there. Like obviously the author's not going to be arguing against wonder because this whole passage talks about wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we can kind of revisit this to see how the author feels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Let's jump into some questions. Okay. It has been said that no work of any worth can be done if it is not inspired by something. Which of the points made in the passage would best support this claim?
I'm leaning towards B,
Mm-hmm.
and not only
Cool.
because we literally have that highlighted in paragraph 2, but
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk through the choices really fast. So, we want a point that talks about like work is inspired by something.
Mhm.
Um, A, true philosophers are curious about the way the world works. It's like a maybe, but it's not directly kind of thinking of like inspired by something.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
I like
yeah, it's not answering what like what's that something.
mhm. Yeah, so if we talked about wonder is activated by something outside the philosopher, and then that would mean that something outside is like inspiring them to think and like process it.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I like B. Let's see. Thinking starts with being struck by something you admire.
No.
Yeah, I think this is not really even a point that's made in the passage, right?
No.
Okay, let's see. B, correct. Cool.
Amazing. Give me that 53%.
Woo. Okay, cool. That makes sense. That was pretty straightforward.
What I learned from the philosophy passage is that, like from the one I did yesterday, is it's easier to show proof or find your proof within the philosophy passages based on the answers, or wait, vice versa. It's easier to find evidence for each answer choice from the passage. At least for philosophy, I thought it was easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe it's because of that jargon and because it's like the idea is the same no matter how it's phrased. But I don't know if, but that probably also
Yeah.
follows with the other answers as well. Because from what I've read, is that every answer would have to have some evidence somewhere in the passage, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's against or pro the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that like part of that might just be like either misunderstanding or like not fully understanding, or like there's evidence, but it's like kind of indirect or not quite like supporting it in the way that you think kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, when you come up with like, oh, I could support other answer choices, but then when you kind of dig into that, you should hopefully be able to find that like it doesn't really stand
On its own.
well.
So,
Yeah. Okay. So the author seems to be trying to understand.
I'm more attracted to one answer than the other, but I'm trying to reason my way through it.
Okay. Which two?
I'm attracted to D.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think B is relevant. It's not saying what it's being studied. It's just more of how philosophers view things to study, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And then it remains relevant versus abstract. I don't know how relevancy is portrayed through this passage.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like an outsider perspective. And then
Mm-hmm.
whenever I see abstract, I just think as like unique.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know really if uniqueness is more of portraying here either. But also,
Yeah.
well, here we go. I literally answer my own question. The first sentence in Greek philosophy, there exists a very important answer to the question. What makes us think? It's
Cool.
okay. I'm 100% confident now.
Indeed. Yeah. Whoa.
What? No.
This okay, I would have also picked D. This is tempting because the passage spends some time on how philosophers think with the point of wonder in the first few paragraphs, but then the passage uses that point to make another point about what philosophers study.
What?
Philosophy studies the truth, hidden truth of things,
Wouldn't say it's a study.
objects. I think,
I don't like that.
yeah. And I think this question you had the right reasoning. And I mean, sometimes Jack Westman is a little, but as I say, I feel like D is a fair answer for that. It's tempting because past how philosophers think. Yeah, I think that that's a little meh. Let's see what the public has said.
Someone says number 2 got me.
Yeah,
Number 1. A lot of people are complaining about number 1.
which is funny because I don't know. I thought that one was pretty straightforward.
That was straightforward too. Oh, I really don't get how number 2 is B. Preach to the choir. Miss QT, Miss Q2.
Okay. Anyways,
All right, so
I
nobody's really like, what? They're
mean,
just
you picked the 58% answer. Um, yeah, I mean, I think this might be more of a wording of the answer choices because, like, what you were saying is like what you were thinking of more of like a concrete what.
Hidden truth, which I would argue.
Sorry, can you hear me? My computer
yes.
went weird for a minute. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I would argue that like philosophers studying the hidden truth of things fits more with how they think rather than what they study. So I think this is more just like a semantics kind of wording one. But cool, you have the right line of thought, so I'm not too upset about that.
I just don't understand where the studies is because that's not really portraying of like studying because this is really general on how philosophers approach something, which is the hidden truth behind its objects, but it's not saying like specifically. I don't know. I feel like some outside knowledge would have to also be interpreted for B,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know.
At the hidden truth. Yeah, because I guess what they're referencing here is kind of this sentence that we highlighted. Whoops. Philosophy then is the wonder at the hidden truth behind what strikes them. And so they're saying that what philosophy studies is the hidden truth. And we're saying that they think by wondering at the hidden truth. So we're saying the same thing. It's just they said this supports what B, and we said this supports D. So I think that might just be more of like the wording or like semantics of how they phrase this question.
Maybe if D was what instead of how, it would be more correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because maybe how is more of that like step 1, 2, 3, but
Mm-hmm.
what is more direct on what you're trying to find. You're trying to
Yeah.
find the hidden truth. And I guess that's what B is also referencing, what you're trying to study. You're trying to study the hidden truth.
Yeah. And I guess if we just think about like, so we have this part like what makes us think, because we also talked about like the who, what, when, where questions
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. Like we're thinking about what makes us think, then we're looking at like what people think about, what do philosophers think about, and then the answer could fit better with like wonder and that kind of thing.
Hidden truths,
Hidden
gold.
truth, yeah.
Ugh,
Okay,
teasing.
I see that now.
Yeah.
Okay. However, you and 58% were in the same boat.
Okay, so somewhat confident.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell because like the AAMC never gives you like the breakdown of who picks what for what question, but like I don't know. Okay. Given the passage discussion of philosophy, which of the following questions would most reasonably be asked by a philosopher?
Speaking of who, what, when, and why.
Mm-hmm. Which?
The hidden truth behind what strikes them. World reveals the truth behind its objects and forces to those that can wonder at them to the philosophers. It lets it hide itself, namely behind appearances. Truth behind something.
So I feel like we're looking for a choice that fits with like that, right? Because we have like this hidden truth itself is not visible. Yeah, so we want to look for an answer choice that would like fit with like wondering about or thinking about like the truth behind something.
Yeah, that's why I'm leaning towards one.
How many cities are on Earth?
No.
Oh, oh, you're leaning towards like one of them.
Yeah.
Which one?
Why is A right? I'll cry.
No,
Okay, good.
I didn't think
Oh,
so. I just
okay,
thought
good.
by one you meant like A, and I was like, oh,
No,
okay.
no, I don't think one makes any sense with all of this.
Mhm.
I thought of between C and D, but I like D more.
I agree. Yeah, because it's talking about like, so like wonder would be activated by something from the outside. So like you would look at a sunset and experience like admiration and
Exactly.
kind of marvel, and then you could wonder about like the truth behind it, like why is it doing this? Yeah,
And
I like
also,
D a lot.
and I'm referencing also to the last paragraph, to the last highlight, that it likes to
Hmm.
hide itself, namely behind appearances. It's more of the appearance is a sunset or the sky is red.
Hmm. Yes,
Fabulous.
they approach the work of philosophers. Cool. Yeah, and it even talks about how like physicists are kind of like philosophers, and like this would kind of fit with that vein of thinking.
Hmm.
Okay. The author claims that on the question of what philosophers originally wondered about, philosophers blank. So, what philosophers originally wondered about? I think that's referencing kind of this beginning, right?
Agreed. Puzzles to solve. Wait.
So, you think,
I like C, but TBD. There's no other beginning principle. Correct
Mhm.
answer. A, no. D, no.
we're in awe of divine power.
Yeah, those works. What makes us think? Because the editor says he was wondering in the ordinary sense of being puzzled, and then Socrates agrees with him.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm
Well,
like,
okay. Compliments him. This is the true mark of the philosopher, never comes back to the issue. The short passage reads, "For this is chiefly the passion of the philosopher to wonder. There is no other beginning and principle of philosophy than this one." Okay.
or it's
Um,
certain.
so I think we have that like philosophers wondered is kind of the establishment of this paragraph, right?
Yes.
So when we're thinking about like what did they wonder about? Maybe we can look at the next paragraph. Let's see. Oh yeah. Upon closer inspection, these few words hint at much more, leading us to discover what these philosophers wonder about.
Yeah, it goes into more Homer.
So we're gonna need to like cite something probably from paragraph 2 in our answer choice. The Greek word here for wonder occurs regularly in Homer and derives from one of the many Greek words for seeing in the sense of beholding. In Homer, this wonder-struck beholding is usually reserved for men to whom a god appears. Moreover, the gods who appeared to men had this peculiarity. They appeared in familiar human disguise and were recognized as divinities only by those whom they approached. Okay, the responding wonder, therefore, is not something men can summon up by themselves. The wonder is something to be suffered, not acted. It is a passive activity. Okay, so what philosophies originally wondered about? Which choice? Let's think about in the context of paragraph 2 makes the most sense.
Well, now I'm between B and D. But I don't like praying.
Okay, let's think. Okay, what are your thoughts on A? Let's just go through.
I don't like it. Power's too strong.
Well, okay, we're in awe of divine power. There's I mean, I guess like a god could be a divine power,
That's
right?
the only way I can see it is more if we're talking about Homer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I guess we're thinking about like what people like originally wondered about. And this original wonder in Homer seems to be for like gods, right?
Yeah, I was just looking at that sentence. Now I understand. Okay, JK. I think A is more aligned.
Yeah, because I also don't like with D, like you were saying, I don't like prayed. Um, and I think C is kind of thinking about like the traditional sense of wonder where you're like confused and
Which
we're
is what
thinking
they're
about
against.
something different.
Which is what they said that they're against it in paragraph 1 or somewhere. They said it's not about surprise. Oh, sorry, paragraph 3. Neither puzzlement nor surprise nor perplexity.
Yeah, so it's not this kind of wonder. And
Um,
then I don't even know what this is saying. What philosophers originally wondered about, philosophers were uncertain of them, were often uncertain of them.
I think it's more of saying they weren't sure where wonder would be addressed. Like they didn't know what would be the actual origin of wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I guess now it's more of saying where is wonder originated from, and now it's actually now then the question is basically from the Greek word, which is related to Homer, and Homer was a
Mm-hmm.
god. If they used a different word for prayed, I would be more aligned with it because it seems like they were inspired by Homer,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know if they were religious or like where prayed would really align with. We don't know how they were treated or like how they praised Homer. Just know that Homer was the god who acts.
Mm-hmm.
69%. Oh, I thought this was a harder question. Is this a moderate
Yeah,
or
me too.
medium question?
Yeah,
Or I thought
I
this
thought it
was
was harder too, but what philosophers originally wondered about. Okay, I guess that makes sense when you come to like this sentence, and then the only thing you can really get from like this part of the paragraph is A.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. The assertion that the work of physicists resembles the works of philosophers is.
Oh, boy.
So that's down at the end, I think, right?
Correct.
Many still have this wonder when they study the work of physicists who are still trying to reveal the truth behind everyday phenomena. In that way, they approach the work of philosophers.
I like A and D.
Mm-hmm. A, true on the basis of what philosophers do, or D, suggested by similarities in what they study? Okay, let's think about it. The assertion that the work of physicists resembles the work of philosophers. So, I guess if we think about A, true on the basis of what philosophers do, we can think about like philosophers wonder at the hidden truth behind things we see. And then it's also saying that physicists try to reveal the truth behind everyday phenomena.
Yes.
So I feel like that seems
It and it's suggested by similarities in what they study. It says Greek philosophers study this nature, but it never really addresses what physicists study. It's just study the work.
Yeah, exactly.
And A more aligns of the what philosophers.
Yeah. And I think because this says also like suggested by, it's not even really suggested, it's like very explicitly kind of said. So I don't even think like suggested is quite the right word to use there, right? Because it says that like physicists' work resemble the work of philosophers because they I think I don't know, I can see how it could be D.
Ah,
Now I see what that means.
that's rude. That's just rude right there. All right.
Is the information on what philosophers do is insufficient to render the assertion mentioned in the okay. This is stupid. So it's saying that like this is true because on the basis of what philosophers and physicists do.
Bruh.
Like so this it's not supported just by what philosophers do. We would also have to say what physicists do.
That's dumb. I thought that's
Okay.
already like like I thought that was already assumed, but okay, fine. Plus, I thought it was more based on how they resemble to philosophers. So philosophers would be more of the subject of the answer, but I guess in D they're referencing both.
Okay. The assertion that the work of physicists resembles the works of philosophers is suggested by similarities in what they both study.
That's annoying, but okay, fine.
Okay. I kind of understand it, but yeah. Okay. Last one. According to the passage, if someone wants to be a philosopher, that person should.
Uh-huh. B.
Yeah, it seems pretty
I
easy.
just glanced at B and I'm like, I like it.
Cool. Yeah, I like that.
Seconds.
Yeah. Okay. This one was interesting. I think that a lot of the kind of incorrect questions that we got came from like wording and kind of the way that the passage was asking us about things.
Yeah.
I think that like in terms of main idea, you definitely got it and we were able to kind of dig into it. And I think that like when you do more AMC specific
Yeah.
passages, you can really dig into like what's the specific like wording of this question or why did I get this wrong? Because it's hard to know if like they would exactly word it the same on like an AMC test or if it would like make more sense when you did it kind of in an AMC setting.
I was literally thinking, should we switch to AMC cars now?
Yeah.
Because like, I don't know, I'm worried that I'm gonna get into the aspect of Jack Weston now with getting fewer questions wrong. But then is the idea going to be the same, with AMC? But there's some differences, so I have no idea.
Yeah, I think that like interpreting and like referencing for evidence is good in terms of Jack Weston. I wouldn't get into like the super nitty gritty of like wording and that kind of stuff with Jack Weston because it's going to be different for the AAMC. So like if you can read through a passage and like so get 4 out of 6 or 5 out of 6 and understand like, okay, I got the main idea. I tripped up kind of on like the specifics or wording of question, that's a good place to be because when you switch to AAMC, you can be a little bit more vigilant about like figuring out how they want you to word or answer things and how that works.
Which you would hope is more clear and could only help you. I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Do your students tend to do better on AMC after going through Jack Western, specifically for cars?
Yes, but I think that like a lot of people, it's hard because a lot of people are like pretty bad when they start. So it's hard to tell if it's like just improvement in cars in general or like improvement like because of the Jack Weston prep.
I
Um,
understand.
I think that it's just doing any kind of cars content and engaging with main ideas is helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Like I would love to do like the social sciences. I would love if I could get 3 or 4, like 3 out of 6 or 4 out of 6. That would
Mm-hmm.
be solid. But then for humanities passages, I would love to do 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if you're in that like range, like I think you're like 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6 in Jack Weston, that's like I've understood the main point. Um, like
Yeah.
I'm kind of starting to get it.
I don't think I've done enough in order to actually interpret, but I do see improvements aside from like right at the beginning, around 22nd of September, 29th of September, I was like 2 out of 6, 1 out of 5. And
Mm-hmm.
then after I think we had our second dense cars, I started getting 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6.
That's good.
But then there's the geography one that I think we went through that I got
Mm-hmm.
2 out of 6, and I was like, what? And that was more of a harder, moderate passage. But then the
Mm-hmm.
rest of them were more easy, moderate, and I was able to get 4 out of 5 or 4 out of 6.
That's good. Yeah, I think that it's kind of a hopefully gonna be like a not like a straight road up, but like a slow ascent.
It seemed like with the philosophy, I had about 15 minutes. I time myself just to know where I am. I don't care about time. But then with the psychology, it was 18 minutes. For like it's between like minutes is like not stable, but accuracy is becoming stable.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, that's good because then like minutes can kind of come hopefully more naturally once you're getting more
I agree.
questions right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay,
Where are we
let's
drawing
see.
today, Chief?
That's what I was gonna ask to see if you wanted to do. So we could do either more cars, or we could think about a science topic and maybe go through some content type stuff.
As much
Um,
as I hate it, I think we should do chemistry or physics.
okay,
I mean, I'm
that
doing chemistry
sounds good.
today anyway, but might as
Uh,
well. We did bio and biochem and psych.
mm-hmm. Okay. Well, nope, stop.
I'll let you choose between
Okay.
chem and physics because I know how much you love physics.
What do you want to, or I guess what are you thinking about in chem and physics today or right now?
I think with chem, I think it's just more of seeing questions and aligning what I do and what I don't know. But with physics, I think it's more of how can I quicken myself with like of the thought process, especially with recognizing what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
especially if I need to know if I need to do calculations or not, or if it's just us applying passage, like
Mhm.
listening, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Um, what I saw, okay, so have you done like your fluids stuff yet in terms
I
of,
have done fluids at rest. I am on lesson 7, meaning I am within fluids of motion. So like I'm familiar with fluids of motion, but I'm in that lesson.
Mhm. Okay.
So I've done all of 4E. I'm just starting 4B.
4E. Let's go scroll down to see 4E.
No, 4B, like bat, not E.
Oh, 4B.
I could also do 4E. I like mystery.
Circulation. Okay, I see. 4D. Okay, so thinking about fluids, the circulatory system, gas phase.
Yep,
Um,
that's basically this week's physics
okay.
section is 4B, gases and fluids in motion.
Uh-huh. That sounds pretty solid. How does that all feel? I feel like that's just some like equations and stuff, right?
I agree. I think a lot of it is just with the equations. I know with translational motion, it's easy for AMC to pick and choose if they want it more content or equation based.
Mm-hmm.
Because they do a lot they like doing that based on the topic. And I noticed before with practice exams, they really like equations for translational motion. They like questions about equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And then they interpret both with forces. Um, I think it's just knowing that rhythm and just getting used to doing more passages after I go through the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like in terms of at least like gases, it's just kind of knowing, let's
Oh,
see, your ideal gas law,
yeah.
and that should kind of make sense. Kind of everything else should fit pretty easily into that kind of equation. Do-do-do. Just
Yeah,
knowing some,
all the 3-4 laws go back to ideal gas law.
yeah. So it's like pretty easy to just memorize the ideal gas law and then just figure out the other ones from there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cool. Trying to see.
It boggles my mind that I never was taught fluids in college because I actually like fluids.
Mm.
They only teach
That's
it to the engineers. And I'm like, why are you not interpreting it in physics 1?
good. Have you been doing like the Khan Academy passages as you've done the fluid stuff?
I uh So I started doing that with the translational motion, and then I realized how behind I started getting just with content. So then I started to I've been writing out like passages so I can, I, LOL, maybe. Do you mind if I share my screen real quick?
Yeah. Here.
Sorry. I just want to show you. If I can, wait, JK, I have to open this up first. We're gonna share that. We'll go back to here. Jack Western. So like passage progress. So I have it based on the tabs. Fluids is 4B, so I have to fix that. But like with each passage,
Mm-hmm.
that Khan Academy offers, and then when I did it, the score, how much time. So then I can go back to them based on like date if I go through them the second time. Or if I'm going to just review second law, I can choose whatever passage. But they also correlate with other topics, especially from other subtopics, but they also correlate with other topics. And I
Mm-hmm.
noticed with fluids, there is one that goes specifically in all 3. So I
Mm-hmm.
made a note that I want to do that at least like within my fluids content, so I can at least all three. So that's what I'm going to do starting this week is interpret one or two passages that follow all topics within or all subtopics within that topic. Fluids, there's a lot of interception. Forces, there's a lot of interception. Translation motions here and there, but whenever you ask about speed and velocity, there's always acceleration at some point, and then there's also force. So force and translational motion kind of go hand in hand, and same with work and force, they kind of go hand in hand. But I want to do this also for bio and biochem, so then if it's more on reasoning based on that topic, I can go back to a practice passage and do it, so I can correlate those two rather than string content. So more direct answer to your question, yes, to an extent, but I'm more organizing myself for later once I actually do more questions.
Okay, I like that.
But this also helps to kind of underlie my foundation of how much do I really need to know of content to the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, because for some of them you'll just see like, okay, I need to have memorized like 2 equations and then I'm done this whole section.
Oh, I drew up a draft. Sorry, we're jumping everywhere, but I drew up a draft that I could actually send you right now. But actually, I don't even have to send it to you. I can just open it up. Or if you want me to send it to you, you know what, I'll just send it to you. Screw it. So you can also have it. Because I was going through my biochem questions and like review topics, and one of them ended up being from the very first week, and it was going through metabolism of fats and anabolism of fats. So we're going into fatty acid synthesis and beta oxidation. How specific do we need to be aware of those two pathways? Because like you have fatty acid synthase, and then there's like 5 steps within fatty acid synthase. How do we need to know or be aware of do you think we should be aware of those 5 steps within it, or just know that we go from millennial CoA to palmitic acid or palmitate through fatty acid synthase with that
Yeah,
reaction?
so I think so for like fatty acids specifically, so that I feel like I don't really see the like enzyme names specifically tested. Or because like fatty acid synthesis, you should kind of know it all occurs in like one enzyme, right? That has kind of like different components, kind of doing all the different steps. So I think if you're just kind of generally aware of what's happening, so if you think about how beta oxidation works and you know how like that progression goes, you can just kind of think through that backwards and pretty much just understand like, okay, what functional groups are changing, like what do we start with, what do we end with. I think if you get that, then that's about the depth that you need for that.
Yeah, because they're reverse of each other. It's just knowing of the net reaction, what goes in, what comes out.
Yeah, but also knowing, let's see if I can find like
I always got confused,
picture or
even in
something.
biochem, of knowing like the correlation between the two, and it always screwed me over, especially with the specifics. So now it's more of how specific should I know, or if it's more of, I know it's not biochem, like actual biochem class, but you know how, like you said, it's more of knowing all the specifics and then being able to narrow it.
Yeah, so I'm pulling up like this is
Yeah,
just
this
the
is
Jack
exactly
West
the
one.
link I sent you. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So yeah, just thinking about like, yeah, you have to know what you're starting with over here. We put in ATP. So thinking about like for this step, you need ATP to power this because it's going to be like energetically unfavorable.
Yes.
So if we're just kind of going through things, I don't think you would need to know like the very specific, like nitty-gritty of each of these steps. I think what you would just want to know is probably like what's happening. So pyruvate, we can think about this. Pyruvate dehydrogenase, we should know. Attaching this like acetyl-CoA group. Malonyl CoA, this just makes sense in that we're adding on another like unit.
Acid, yeah.
Yeah. And then we're just like slowly kind of extending this. So I like this picture because it's pretty simplistic.
Right.
You can think about, so we have like redox reactions going on, because when we add on another unit, right, we have this like carboxylic acid group at the end, right? And we're eventually going to reduce that carboxylic acid all the way down to just carbons. So we need to like go through several steps of reduction. So it's going to make sense. We're doing a lot of reduction. We're using a lot of
NDPH, yeah.
Yeah. So it should kind of like make sense in terms of that. But I don't think you need to know like this step to this step. Just know, okay, here we're releasing CO2 because we're like setting free our hydroxyl group. We are this whole like carboxylic acid group. Yeah. And then we have to, so we reduce from a double bond to a single bond, then to a double bonded carbon, then to a single bond carbon. So it should be kind of like almost the exact opposite of how we've thought about beta oxidation. So I wouldn't know the steps, or I wouldn't worry about the enzyme names. I would just know, okay, we're reducing to build a long carbon chain, and knowing that we're bringing in and we're driving this energetically with ATP, and then with the release of carbon dioxide. So when you release that carbon dioxide, that's also like energetically favorable, because it does much better as like released as a gas than kind of constrained into a carboxylic acid form.
Literally taking the energy from ATP, you're reducing factors and NADPH, and you're getting out water and carbon dioxide in the meantime, and in a cell group, but whatever. Okay, that helps a lot, and that'll also help me to guiding glycogenolysis as well, because it's the same thing except glucose. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty solid.
That whole thing is fatty acid synthase, and then that chain from below shows like fatty acid synthase is basically from malonyl CoA to palmitate. These 5 steps are within that enzyme. Okay, but just basics of those 5 steps and not like just that. Got it. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, because I believe, there's like names, I don't know them off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, me too.
For each of those steps. I can find. I always try to pull up my notes from whenever I took biochemistry.
Oh my God, me too. But it then also gives me PTSD.
Let's see. Where are we even at? Here we go. Oh, here. I like this. Let me just find. I'm going to reshare my screen on a different screen. All right. Cool. So like in the most like simplified version, this is kind of what I like wrote out as the process of synthesis.
Yeah.
Where you have this COO group, you release it as CO2, you have this double bond, it goes to a single bond, then you have the single bond that goes to double bonded carbon. I definitely have it in more detail probably.
I love your handwriting.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, here we are. Yeah.
Yeah, keto synthase, keto reductase. I would not worry about like each of those names.
But this is
Yeah.
important, like acetyl-CoA is from mitochondria, but it needs to come in as citrate because it won't exist as cytoplasm. It
Yeah,
won't
that's gonna
exist as
be.
acetyl-CoA in the cytoplasm.
Mhm. I would
Yeah.
know the name of like acetyl-CoA carboxylase because that's like a
Yeah.
separate enzyme. But yeah,
The key,
um,
yeah.
like the domains of the fatty acid synthase, like that's a little too
Mm-hmm.
extra. Um, cool. Yeah, here's the end.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. I like just looking, so we don't need to know the names of things, but I kind of drew this out as like an iterative process. And so just looking at it visually, you can kind of see
Yes.
like all the reductions and stuff. And then you should know, cool. At the end, I continually make this kind of growing chain. At the end, you have a 16O fatty acid,
Yep.
blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I think that's about the extent that you need to know there. Yeah.
And I like how you emphasize also knowing what changes, like the carboxyl is being reduced
Mm-hmm.
and you have terminology. CO double bond is reduced to an
The
alcohol.
carbonyl.
Carbonyl, thank
Yeah.
you, is reduced to the alcohol, which is going to be reduced to an alkene, reduced to an alkane. Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, you're interpreting those terminologies from other sections within the foundational concept. So it's able to, yeah.
Yeah. I think like you don't need to know like KR does this. You just need to know that reduction literally just goes like
That. Yep.
cool.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
that's exactly what fatty acid synthase does. Yeah.
Yep. Precisely. Okay. That will help when, even though drawing, I'll be able to highlight that so I know what's changing, which will also help to know what's going on rather than just
Yeah.
memorizing.
And on that note, we can jump to like
Oh, Krebs cycle.
yeah. Okay, this is an overkill one.
I mean, I did that too. I did the exact same thing.
So in my bio, like this is not something they emphasize on the MCAT, but in my biochem class, we talked about how like which carbon is actually being like released as CO2. So I like was color coding all the carbons to show which ones were getting released and which ones were.
I would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah, so it's like incredibly over colored.
I love it.
But in terms of like this kind of stuff, um, okay, Krebs cycle, a lot of you basically need to know almost all of these.
Yep.
I feel like. So maybe if we jump up to glycolysis, because I feel like that.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here's one. Glycolysis, I think, is one that can be a little bit more or a little bit less detailed because the three steps that are really emphasized are the irreversible ones. So thinking about hexokinase,
Yep.
adding on that phosphate group.
Yep.
Phosphofructokinase 1, adding on the phosphate group, and then the very last step of pyruvate kinase.
Yep.
And then like when I teach this kind of the middle steps, I like to go through what happens in the enzyme, but I'm not gonna like really stress like, oh, you really need to remember like triose phosphate isomerase. You just kind of want to know like what's changing in the structure here, and then what are we producing? So we have some oxidation going on. We're producing NADH. We're also producing some ATP using this like phosphate group that we already added on up here. So being less worried about like exact names of things and structures and more just knowing what actually happens. And if you know your starting structure, or like I guess if you know kind of right at this step where it gets split into two, you can kind of basically infer what happens to get down to this like final pyruvate structure.
Because it's oxidation, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And then using those phosphate groups that we attached. So there's two reasons why we attach the phosphate groups. Do you know like why?
Well, isn't one of the reasons that we need ADP? So we're using ATP to go through the process. So then we need the phosphate energy, or like the energy from the phosphate, and also to make it negatively charged. So
Okay.
oxidation happen.
Yeah, sort of. So I guess there's like three reasons. Okay, well, we'll
Okay.
talk through it. So the very first reason, like we said, like you kind of alluded to, is this like driving force. So when you detach a phosphate from ATP and turn it into ADP, that's releasing energy. And so let's see. If you look at energy, here's ATP, here's ADP. You're gonna use some energy in like attaching that phosphate onto the glucose.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of this energy is just like released to the environment. So this like kind of remaining energy is going to be the driving force here. So like number one, why we need phosphate group is it gives us a driving force. If you have a irreversible step at the beginning, so here and here, you're going to create a lot of like reactant. And then like Le Chatelier's principle is going to push all of the rest of these steps to form product. And then as your product accumulates at this step, you have this last irreversible step that like takes it out of the equation so that you can continue to produce more reactant and kind of drive this cycle forward. So it's a driving force for Le Chatelier's principle for all of the middle steps. This second kind of big reason, we have this relatively small molecule in glucose, right? And then we're chopping it in half.
Mm-hmm.
This small molecule, we want to make sure it doesn't like float away or leave the cell.
Mm-hmm.
By adding that phosphate group, we're adding like a lot of that, you know, negative charge. We're adding a bit more bulk onto it. This is going to prevent it from being able to like leave the cell. It's going to prevent it from diffusing through the lipid bilayer, because now that it's negatively charged, it can't get
Okay.
through that membrane. So it also like anchors it inside the cell. Otherwise, you can imagine like if you chop this like very small like thing in, you need something like this. These phosphate groups, that's
Mm-hmm.
why we have two, are anchoring both of our little pieces inside the cell so that they're now stuck in the cytoplasm and are going to have to go through this process, and they're not just going to kind of diffuse away into the environment.
Like how pyruvate would.
Yeah. So that's why one of the reasons why we add two phosphates, so that we have one on like each side after it gets cleaved. And you might have heard before, like when you add this first phosphate, you're anchoring that glucose inside the cell. It can still kind of go different directions. It could be stored like as glycogen, but then once you add the second phosphate, you're committed to going down the glycolysis pathway, because you now know that you're going to split it in two and you have these two sides, each with a phosphate.
I never thought of it that way, but that makes so much sense.
So once you add that second one, you're like, okay, I know I'm about to do glycolysis because I'm going to split it in half and have a phosphate on either side. So I think that's helpful to like remember as like, oh, this is your commitment step for glycolysis.
Which is why it's irreversible.
Yeah, and also because like we're doing that same thing and releasing that driving force energy.
And then which
And
makes
then
sense being the last step then, because then you're absolutely taking it off and then it can do whatever it wants and continues to PDH.
yeah. And so with this last step being irreversible, so that energy, you're releasing energy by removing this phosphate group from here. You're consuming some energy by making this ATP, but this like enol position is actually super unfavorable. So like when you do this final step, you're releasing so much energy that you have enough to make ATP and have some left over, that it still is like an irreversible driving forward reaction.
This is the enol to keto, right?
Yeah. because we have this like double bonded C with like the O, this would be like OH, but it's O with a phosphorus group. And then we move that double bond, right? Because it makes sense. If you just think about it like chemistry wise, like which would prefer to have a double bond, a carbon or an oxygen?
Yep.
Because the
Wow.
oxygen's going to want that electron density.
Wow. I
Cool.
never thought of it like that.
Yeah. So
That's
I
so
think that
smart.
my favorite way to go through all this stuff is in a very like reasoning forward way. So that it's less about like memorize this structure to this structure and think about what is exactly happening. And you can
Yes.
kind of fill in the blanks from there. In my biochem class, our professor made us like tell a story where we'd have to like narrate what happens without referencing any structures or like drawing anything. Just say like, yeah, you want to like add the phosphate to anchor it in, and then you want to oxidize this because our eventual goal is like oxidizing carbons for energy, all that kind of stuff.
I love how
Uh,
straightforward they told me. It was more of like, yeah, you have glucose wanting to get two pyruvate molecules and you build up a lot of ATP in order for it to be driven to make more ATP. Like that's it.
mhm,
I'm like, all right, so the key is more ATP you're consuming in order to produce ATP
mhm.
through a bunch of
Yeah.
steps. But like,
Yeah, it doesn't always make sense. So now hopefully that makes more sense of like why do we even have the ATP? Like why do we even consume some in the first place? And then it makes sense that we're producing it because we want to like harness all the energy that we're producing by changing the structure. But
yeah.
like there's no real reason at first to be like, why are we even like making ATP in the first place or using ATP in the first place?
Did you use the same tactic with pentose phosphate pathway?
Yes, I think I went over that like so in my biochem class, like we barely even covered it. I went over that like in quite sparse detail, um, and found that to be. I think there's only like one enzyme you need to know.
So like,
Let's
I
see.
think it's like, I mean, yeah, G6P.
Yeah.
Ribose 5-phosphate nucleic acids. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is like probably the extent of my notes on it, but yeah, starting at glucose, turning into ribose. Um, we didn't even talk about kind of the enzyme names, but you can kind of look at the structures here and see what's going on. You oxidize this carbon so that it becomes a CO2, and then you can release that CO2.
Mm.
And that makes sense how we get rid of one carbon because we've got to go from 6 to 5. So we're going to release one as a CO2. And then we can just kind of think about the other steps that are present here. This is literally just like some isomerization, right? Inside to get to ribose. So like we don't really care about this step. But we can just think about like, okay, we've got to convert a carbon into carbon dioxide. That's what's important. We're building up NADPH. That's pretty important. And then we can think about, so in terms of building up NADPH, we're doing oxidation to form NADPH, and then we use NADPH whenever we need to reduce things inside our body, right?
Yep.
So whenever we're like building macromolecules or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then, mm-hmm. And then just thinking about, I think this is kind of a good summary that we talked about is you can do this like oxidative pathway, which is irreversible. And that's because we've like released the CO2 here. And so there's just kind of different, there's the oxidative and non-oxidative pathway. And so you would just use them in a way like, do I want NADPH? Okay, I can do, oxidative. You can also do like forward with the oxidative pathway and backwards with the non-oxidative pathway, like if you want to reuse if you just want NADPH as a net and you want to take your ribose, make it, and then destroy it and turn it back into glucose.
Yep.
So yeah, I think just being aware of this oxidation in the very first step of the oxidative pathway to release CO2, and then just understanding kind of NADPH and ribose, and the body will kind of use that as needed, I think is pretty much everything you need to know.
That's a really good tactic, but now I'm going to apply that to the other pathways as I review them.
Because I think that like metabolism in general is an incredibly like dense topic. The MCAT is not super dense about it. In terms of like knowing structures, it's more of knowing the biochemical changes happening.
Exactly. And they overlap with organic chemistry too.
Yeah, so the structures it'll want you to know will be like your, you know, amino acids, that kind of thing. The like other stuff it'll want you to know is more of like what's the chemical change happening, and then hopefully that should be pretty easy to figure out. Okay, reduction is usually like building a molecule, beta or fatty acid synthesis. Oxidation is kind of destroying a molecule to release energy. Beta oxidation, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, all that kind of stuff. And like once you get that basics down with like a little bit more detail, I think you're pretty set in terms of all that.
Yep, right here too. Yep.
Yeah. So like I would
all.
not sit and memorize like where amino acids like come in and out of all these processes, and like this is so much overkill to know. I would just kind of think, let's see.
Urea cycle to an extent.
Urea, yeah, that's another one that's like just kind of the basics. Just think about glutamine, like basically this, and then like urea. Yeah. But I wouldn't go too hard into like, this was just stuff that we talked about in my class, like out of interest. I think that, yeah.
But hey, it helps with medical school and like when you're actually taking biochem too, because you're gonna have to interpret all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's wow, we didn't even go in as in depth like this in either my undergrad or graduate. Oh, ketones, love it.
Yeah, like ketone body synthesis, you don't really need to know these names. I would just be aware of like HMG-CoA is like a spin-off enzyme that's involved in cholesterol synthesis. So you can think about how that could relate into the ketone body. And then there's like different ketone bodies, but that's not important. You just need to know that like, okay, ketone bodies are happening when there's like an excess of acetyl-CoA, and they can be used for energy, but it's not ideal because it's not as much energy.
Unless you're in starvation mode.
Yep. And then just knowing that like, oh, that's only something that liver cells can do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say all this is like, I feel like all our diagrams are very complicated, but it's definitely something you can do to a less complicated extent. Okay. Does that like make sense as to like the level of understanding that you should have? Cool.
Yes, heavily. Which also then ties in with the amino acids as well, is like knowing what happens. So now I have a follow-up question regarding hormones and knowing how like hormones are their own thing, separate, even regarding endocrine system functioning and homeostasis. Do you think it could potentially help to find that flow and connection if introduce different hormones with each system. So like, for example, skeletal, I can introduce calcitriol and what's parathyroid hormone. And then like for metabolism, introduce insulin, glycogen, or not glycogen, glucagon, so on, and kind of help to see how those changes in those hormones would, like the changes in metabolism with those hormones, like insulin would act if there's too much sugar, glucagon not enough. What would it do? What would it inhibit?
So I think the best way to approach hormones is like at the beginning, just be aware of the different classes of hormones. So you have your steroid hormones, your like amino acid derived hormones, and then your peptide hormones. So what I would just be aware of is the characteristics of each of these, what they can do, what they act like, kind of their general patterns. And then when you get introduced to a new hormone in a system, just put it into one of these categories. And that should pretty much help you understand like a lot of its function. So if you just think about like, okay, we've been introduced to like if you're thinking about the thyroid, like T3 and T4, we don't really need to know a ton about what they do, but we can know that they're amino acid derived, right? And that'll kind of give us like a good idea of like, okay, they're going to be relatively small because they're just from a singular amino acid. Give us a little bit of an idea. I feel like you don't really need to know that much about like the amino acid one specifically. A lot of your big stuff is going to be for like steroid versus peptide hormones. So I would kind of think about steroid and peptide hormones, that kind of thing, and then just fit each hormone that you learn kind of into that category. And don't worry about like too much specific beyond that. Obviously, insulin, you have to know like what insulin does. And like, but when you get into like more complex systems with lots of different hormones, it might just be helpful to think about like, okay, we're releasing like a bunch of different peptide hormones, and here's what these are going to do. We're releasing a lot of steroid hormones kind of in our endocrine system, and like, here's what these are going to do. So I think that thinking about hormones in broad classes would be more helpful than kind of very, very specific.
So even with contact, not even just passage, go simple, and then if you need to, go narrow.
Because like, so I mean, aside from like insulin, glucagon, like cortisol, aside from like those very big ones that you know are like huge. So and yeah, like if you get like a hormone that's involved and like I don't remember which one you mentioned earlier, but like yeah, you were talking about the skeletal system, like that one's not that important, you know. You can just kind of classify it into this category and be aware that like, okay, it's going to be, you know, a steroid hormone or a peptide hormone. And you know, if you I don't think I've ever seen questions about, I feel like the only like like you don't really get hormonal signaling questions for the skeletal system. It's a lot of like
What does it
you may
do?
have to think about like acetylcholine.
Exactly.
And that's really about it. So yeah, I would just kind of approach it from a broad perspective. And if it seems like something is like a really intricate detail, because you also have like levels, like it could be something like, oh, you could learn this from the MCAT, but it's like so low yield. I'd rather you focus on like the high yield stuff.
Yeah.
And if you get this like steroid peptide down, and then you're like feeling great about it, and then you come across like one super hard question that asks you about it, then you could like bother to learn that. But I would definitely stick with like kind of the higher level kind of classification and understanding of things before you dive into like that specific level of detail.
Yeah. Because like it's the same with aldosterone or vasopressin, unless those are synonymous. But like ideally, like, what they should do, or like, where they are supposed to do, like blood pressure and water and excretory kidney. But again, it's more of like, is it a steroid or a peptide?
Hmm. Yeah, and if you just know that like a one sentence of its function,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
um, that's gonna kind of cover it. And if I say, okay, you have high levels of aldosterone, I would want you to be able to tell me what does that mean. And then if you have kind of your whole little kidney diagram, you would be able to like kind of reason through what happens from that. But like just kind of the simplest, like one sentence, like aldosterone will do this. Yeah.
Okay, that helps.
Okay. Cool.
Broad and simple, but also helps connect topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that like the most like overarching concepts tend to be the most important too. Because you get like, I don't know, things start to like connect and stuff. And then
Yes.
you'll see stuff come up like again and again and again. And then you'll kind of like get that stuff, an understanding of that stuff.
Broad, simple, connect.
Mm-hmm.
CBS.
Cool. Okay. Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about today?
No, honestly, from what we talked, since the passage will really guide me and be my motto for at least this week, and probably carry on throughout the next couple weeks too. So this is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
This was helpful.
Yeah. And then we can think about like um kind of synthesizing and going through topics and connecting them. That's also something that like I think a lot of people struggle with is like connecting the topics because like I kind of showed you that whole diagram of, you know, glycolysis and then we made connections to like the chemistry and thinking about like, oh, do you want like a double bonded O or double bonded C, like that kind of stuff. Like that kind of connection I think is like the hardest step that for students to like make themselves. So that's also stuff that we can kind of think about and talk about. If you say, hey, I've covered all the amino acids, I can sit down with you and say, okay, well let's talk about them and let's think about, you know, what does this mean with like a positively charged amino acid? Let's think about kind of chemistry. Let's also think about, you know, where these come into play kind of in our biological systems, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they want you to do in med school too. So it's all
Mm-hmm.
tying together. There's a reason, but it's a stupid reason why this thing exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as if you got to learn that like route of synthesizing and yeah,
Connecting.
it's a time.
Yep, it is. Well, good.
Okay.
It's a start.
Yeah, I I I think you're on a good foot. Um,
Good.
I
I'm
think
glad.
that that's good. Yeah. Um, maybe we can do because I know we've done a lot of like passage and kind of question strategy so far. We can also take like a session sometime to figure out kind of how to fit concepts together and then like incorporating in questions and all that stuff. So if you
Ooh,
ever think of anything that like you're like, oh, I feel comfortable on amino acids, and if you want me to be like, do you like, let's really talk about it.
yeah, exactly. Do you want me to
Uh,
really question?
but more like, okay, if you can draw out every amino acid, cool. Let's discuss it to a level that you're like kind of really understanding. Okay, what does it mean to be like a polar amino acid and like that kind of stuff. I feel like can just be a helpful connection point.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think that is potentially all for today then. Let's see, when would you like to meet next?
Calendar. Mhm. Since we met midweek, we could do. How's your schedule this weekend or even Monday?
Yeah, I can do either Sunday or Monday. Either of those work. How about Sunday?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I don't care about the time. I'm free all day.
Okay, let's shoot for like 11.
Okay. That is perfectly fine.
Awesome. Here, I have a football game on Saturday.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, Duke is playing North Carolina State.
Oh, okay. That'll be fun. Is it
Yeah,
a game or are you going?
it's home game. So
Oh,
we're like kind of okay at football this year. So
oh,
people are
hey,
excited. Yeah.
perfect way to go through your senior fall.
Yeah. For real. We beat Clemson in like our opening game of the season. It was kind of lit.
There you go.
I
I
don't know how
don't,
much you followed college football.
not at all. Our football team sucked in undergrad. So maybe I went to one game and I was like, this is embarrassing.
Mhm. Yeah, that's how we've been the past few years, and now this year it's like, wow, I could actually like stand to watch us.
Yeah.
Cool.
But good. I'm glad.
Awesome. Well, then I will see you on Sunday. If you think of anything you want to specifically go over, just shoot me a text.
Will do.
Cool. Okay. I will see
Thanks
you
for
Sunday
being
then.
flexible with my migraines and everything.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
no worries. Yeah, that's like the worst. Hopefully that um, doesn't impact your studying too much.
Yeah, I just need to not be stressed, keep up with everything, and then migraines can come. Just hopefully it's not based on stress. So
Mhm.
if I can maintain the stress and like have a rhythm, then it will help reduce their frequencies, but never know with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Sometimes that just sucks.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Well, have a
Well,
good day.
thank you. I'll see you on Sunday.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.